The last wagon disappeared into morning haze, leaving Clara standing alone with her trunk in the vast emptiness of Nebraska territory. 27 wagons had rolled away, including the one carrying her brother who'd decided an unmarried sister was too much burden for California dreams. Dust settled on her calico dress like a burial shroud. 3 days of water, her mother's Bible, a carpet bag of mended clothes. These possessions mocked her against the infinite prairie. "You can't stay here." The voice came from behind. Clara turned to find a weathered man beside a paint horse, his eyes holding the peculiar distance of those who'd seen too much. "Name's Eli," he said, studying her with neither pity nor judgment. "Next settlement's 3 weeks riding. You'll die here alone." Clara's fingers tightened on her trunk handle. "Are you offering assistance?" "I'm offering survival," Eli replied. "Your choice whether you take it." Before we continue, please leave a like and let me know which city you're watching from. Now, let's get back to the story. Clara studied the stranger for a long moment, weighing desperation against dignity. The morning sun climbed higher, already promising another scorching day. She could feel the weight of the empty prairie pressing against her back, endless miles of grass that would swallow her whole if she remained. "If I go with you," she said carefully, "there will be conditions." Eli's weathered face showed the hint of something that might have been approval. "Speak them. Separate bedrolls. I'll earn my passage cooking, mending, keeping watch. I'm no burden to be carried." Her voice held the firm edge of someone who'd already been deemed exactly that by her own blood. "Fair enough." Eli moved toward his horse, pulling a second canteen from his saddlebags. "Can you ride from some? You'll learn more. We'll trade off you ride while I walk. Then switch. The paint's strong, but 3 weeks is hard on any horse carrying double." Clara nodded, then asked the question that mattered most. "Why avoid the main trails? Are you running from the law?" Eli's laugh was dry as dust. "No, ma'am. But a man traveling with a woman who isn't his wife raises questions in towns. Fewer questions on the old tracks. Fewer people, too, which means fewer problems." He gestured at the horizon. "We'll follow the Platte part way, then cut south toward Willow Creek. 3 weeks if the weather holds, and if it doesn't, then we make do." He began securing her trunk to his horse with practiced efficiency. "We'll need supplies first. There's an abandoned stage station half a day north. Might find something useful there." By evening, they'd established a tentative rhythm. Clara had insisted on preparing their first meal together. Working with the meager supplies, Eli carried salt pork, hardtack, and a precious tin of Arbuckle's coffee. Her hands trembled slightly as she measured the grounds into the battered pot, aware of Eli watching from across the small fire. "That's too much," he said quietly. "Coffee has to last." Heat flooded her cheeks. "I haven't made trail coffee before. Half what you'd use for a proper kitchen. It'll be strong enough to float a horseshoe, but it'll stretch." His voice held no mockery, just practical instruction. When she handed him the tin cup, he took a careful sip, and his eyes widened slightly. "Well," he said after a moment, "that'll certainly wake a man up." Despite everything, the abandonment, the uncertainty, the awkwardness of their arrangement, Clara felt her lips twitch toward a smile. "Too strong. Strong enough to strip paint," Eli admitted, but he took another sip. "You'll get the hang of it." They sat in silence as darkness settled around them, each maintaining careful distance across the fire. Clara noticed Eli's duster was torn along the left shoulder seam, the kind of rip that would only get worse with wear. "I can fix that," she said, pointing to the tear. "Tonight, if you've got thread." "In my kit." He hesitated, then added, "Obliged." After they'd eaten, Eli handed her a small sewing kit wrapped in oilcloth. Clara worked by firelight, her needle moving in steady, practiced strokes. She was aware of him watching, not with the hostile suspicion she'd grown used to from her brother's wife, but with something like wonder. "Haven't seen anyone handle a needle like that since—" He stopped, letting the sentence die. Since, Clara prompted gently. Long time ago. He stood abruptly, checking the hobbles on his horse. I'll take first watch. Get some rest. Clara finished the seam, reinforcing it twice to hold against trail wear. When she held up the mended duster, Eli took it with careful hands, examining her work in the firelight. That's fine work, he said quietly. Thank you. It's only fair, Clara replied. You're sharing your supplies, your knowledge. I share what skills I have. He nodded slowly, understanding passing between them. This was how it would be careful trades of necessity, each maintaining their dignity while acknowledging their mutual need. We leave at first light, Eli said, settling against a rock with his rifle across his knees. The stage station should have a well. We'll refill there and see what else might be useful. Clara wrapped herself in her single blanket, using her carpet bag as a pillow. The ground was hard and the night sounds unfamiliar, but for the first time since watching her brother's wagon disappear, she didn't feel entirely alone. Mr. Eli, she called softly. Just Eli, he corrected. Eli. The name felt foreign on her tongue. Thank you for stopping. His response came after such a long pause she thought he might not answer at all. Sometimes the trail puts people where they need to be. Get some sleep, Miss Clara. Tomorrow will be long. She closed her eyes, listening to the steady rhythm of the paint horse's breathing and the soft crackle of the dying fire. 3 weeks to Willow Creek. 3 weeks to figure out if this fragile alliance could hold. 3 weeks to prove she was nobody's burden. The stars wheeled overhead, indifferent to human struggles, but somehow their cold light seemed less hostile with another soul keeping watch in the darkness. 3 days into their journey, Clara had begun to understand the rhythm of traveling with Eli. He spoke little but taught constantly, pointing out details she would have missed, the way birds fell silent before riders approached, how to judge the age of tracks by their edges, which plants marked good water nearby. See how that twig's broken? He crouched beside the trail, gesturing for her to look closer. Fresh break shows white wood. Day old. It's already browning. 3 days. It's gray like everything else out here. Clara knelt beside him, studying the small detail that might mean the difference between safety and danger. And the horse droppings. Fresh ones steam in morning cold. Day old. They're dry on top but moist when you break them. After 3 days, dry all through. He stood, scanning the horizon with that constant vigilance she was beginning to recognize as habit. Knowing who's been where and when, that keeps you alive. It was then she spotted them 3 riders on a distant ridge, black specks against the afternoon sky. Her breath caught. Eli! He followed her gaze, his entire body stilling like a deer sensing wolves. Without a word, he guided his horse toward a dry wash, motioning Clara to follow. They descended into the shallow depression, hidden from view, and waited. The minutes stretched long, marked only by the paint horse's occasional snort and the whisper of wind through sage. Raiders, Clara finally whispered. Maybe just travelers. Either way, best they don't notice us. His hand rested on his rifle, but he made no move to ready it. Violence is always the last choice, Clara, the very last, Clara. They waited another hour before Eli deemed it safe to continue, taking a longer route that added miles but kept them away from the main trail. That evening, they made camp in a cluster of cottonwoods near a small spring. Clara had grown comfortable with their routine. She gathered kindling while he tended the horse. Then she prepared their simple meal while he scouted the perimeter. It was while searching for more firewood that she noticed his saddlebags had come open. As she moved to close them, something brass caught the fading light. Without thinking, she reached for it, a medallion on a worn ribbon, engraved with an eagle and the words, 2nd Wisconsin Infantry. That's private. Eli's voice made her jump. She hadn't heard him approach another skill honed by years of survival. I'm sorry, I didn't mean, she held out the medallion, but he didn't take it. Keep it out if you want. Doesn't matter now. He sat heavily by the fire, suddenly looking every one of his 40-odd years. Just brass and memories. Clara studied the medallion, then carefully placed it back in his bag. She understood the weight of objects that carried more than their physical form. "My mother's thimble," she said quietly, pulling it from her pocket. "She used it to make my father's shirts, my brother's christening gown, my wedding dress that never got worn." Eli looked up at that. Clara continued before he could ask. "Thomas died of fever 2 weeks before our wedding. That was 10 years ago." She turned the thimble in her fingers, its silver surface worn smooth by generations of use. "My brother said I was foolish to still wear mourning after so long. Said no man would want a woman who couldn't let go of the dead." "Is that why he left you?" "That and being 32 with no prospects. His wife convinced him I was a burden they couldn't afford in California, too old to marry, too proud to be a proper spinster aunt to their children." The bitterness in her voice surprised even her. They sat in silence as darkness deepened. Clara prepared their meal, pemmican mixed with water and flour into a simple stew, seasoned with wild onions she'd found near the spring. As she worked, she noticed Eli's hands trembling slightly, the way they did each evening as shadows grew long. That night, she pretended not to hear his strangled cry when nightmares took him. Somewhere in the small hours before dawn, she lay still, listening to his harsh breathing, gradually calm, understanding without being told that offering comfort would be unwelcome. Some wounds couldn't bear touching, even with gentle hands. When morning came, neither mentioned the disturbed night, but as they prepared to leave, Eli spoke suddenly. The war ended and home didn't exist anymore. He secured the saddle with practiced movements, not meeting her eyes. "Wife and daughter died of fever while I was gone, fighting to preserve the Union while my own world burned down. Been drifting 7 years now. Can't seem to find a reason to stop." Clara absorbed this confession, understanding the trust it represented. "We all carry something," she said softly, and impulsively placed her mother's thimble in his calloused palm. "Some of us just carry it longer than others." Eli stared at the small silver object, then carefully handed it back. For a moment, firelight caught the moisture in both their eyes, tears neither would acknowledge or speak of. But something had shifted between them, a recognition of kindred damage that went deeper than words. "I've been taking both watches," Eli said abruptly. "That's foolish. You can handle a rifle. My father taught me. For hunting. Good. You take first watch tonight. Wake me at midnight." He paused, then added, "I sleep light. Sometimes I wake rough. Don't take it personal." "I won't." They traveled in companionable silence that day, but it was different from before. The careful distance remained, but underneath lay an acknowledgement of shared understanding. When Clara spotted useful plants, yarrow for wounds, willow bark for fever, Eli listened with genuine interest. When he showed her how to read weather signs and cloud formations, she paid careful attention. That evening, as Clara took her first watch, she felt the weight of Eli's trust more than the rifle across her knees. He'd given her more than just guard duty. He'd given her purpose again, a role beyond burden or charity case. The vast prairie darkness no longer felt quite so hostile with someone depending on her vigilance. She thought about the riders they'd avoided, the medallion in Eli's saddlebag, the nightmares that haunted his sleep. Everyone on this frontier was running from something or toward something, sometimes both at once. But maybe, just maybe, two broken people traveling together could find something neither expected, not healing. Exactly. But the possibility that carrying weight together made it bearable. When midnight came and she woke Eli for his watch, he nodded his thanks with something approaching a smile. "Any trouble?" "Nothing but coyotes singing," she replied. "Good. Get some rest. Tomorrow we'll reach the old stage station. Might find supplies there." As Clara settled into her bedroll, she realized she'd stopped counting the days until Willow Creek. The journey itself had become something more than mere transition. Each shared meal, each lesson learned, each carefully offered piece of the past, they were building something fragile but real, a partnership born of necessity, but growing towards something neither had words for yet. The stars wheeled overhead in their eternal dance, and Clara fell asleep to the sound of Eli humming softly an old hymn she remembered from childhood, transformed into something sadder, but somehow more beautiful for having survived its own breaking. A week into their journey, the landscape had begun to change. The endless grass gave way to broken country, cut through with creeks and dotted with sandstone formations that rose like ancient ruins. Clara had learned to read the paint horse's moods, the way its ears swiveled to track sounds she couldn't hear, how it stamped when water was near. See those clouds? Eli pointed to wispy streaks across the morning sky. Mare's tails, they call them. Means wind's coming, probably by afternoon. We'll want to find shelter before it hits. Clara studied the delicate formations, filing away another piece of survival knowledge. How long before it reaches us? 4 hours, maybe 5. Enough time to reach Willow Creek, the stream, not the town. Good crossing there if we're careful. They reached the creek by midday, its waters running higher than Eli had expected from recent rains upstream. He dismounted, studying the current with a frown. Trickier than I'd like. The water's not that deep, Clara observed, watching the way it broke around exposed rocks. If we angle upstream, use those boulders as brakes, we could make it across without the horse losing footing. Eli looked at her with surprise. You've done this before. Helped my father drive cattle when I was younger, before my mother said it wasn't proper for a young lady. She couldn't quite hide the bitterness in that last word. But water moves the same whether you're wearing trousers or skirts. Show me the path you'd take. Clara traced the route with her finger, pointing out the eddies and calm spots between rocks. Eli nodded slowly. That would work. You guide, I'll lead the horse. They crossed carefully, Clara calling out warnings about loose stones and deeper channels. Her skirts grew heavy with water, but she kept her balance, moving with growing confidence. When they reached the far bank, Eli's expression held genuine admiration. That was well done, Clara, very well done. The promised wind arrived as they made camp in a grove of cottonwoods. Eli used the opportunity for another lesson, teaching Clara how to properly handle his paint horse. Never approach from directly behind. They can't see you there, and even gentle horses might kick out of fear. Clara ran her hand along the horse's neck, feeling the powerful muscles beneath the coat. What's his name? Never gave him one. Seemed like tempting fate, getting attached. That's sad, Clara said simply, and Eli had no response to that. He showed her how to check the horse's hooves for stones, how to feel for heat that might indicate injury, the proper way to secure a saddle so it wouldn't slip during hard riding. Clara absorbed each lesson eagerly, her natural way with animals evident in how quickly the paint accepted her handling. You've got good hands, Eli observed. Steady and calm. Animals sense that. As evening approached and they settled by their fire, the wind had strengthened but not become the storm Clara had feared. They'd made good time, and for once, their meal included fresh meat, a rabbit Eli had snared that morning. As Clara prepared it with wild onions and sage, she felt an unusual lightness in her chest. You're humming, Eli noted. Clara stopped, embarrassed. I didn't realize. No, it's pleasant. Been a long time since I heard someone hum while cooking. He cleaned his Spencer carbine with practiced movements, the cleaning rod moving in steady rhythm. What song was that? Barbara Allen, my mother's favorite. She used to sing it while she worked. Clara turned the rabbit on its improvised spit. Do you know it? Heard it some. Never could carry a tune myself, but... He paused, then continued with uncharacteristic openness. I knew a mule once that loved music. Strangest thing. This was back in Missouri, before the war. Ornery creature that wouldn't budge for anything except when old Pete played his fiddle. Then that mule would follow him anywhere, gentle as a lamb. Clara found herself smiling. You're making that up. God's honest truth. Pete used to hire himself out just to move that mule for folks. Made good money, too, until the mule died of old age and Pete had to find honest work. Eli's face had softened with the memory. Pete said that mule had more musical appreciation than half the people he knew. The image of a music-loving mule was so absurd that Clara laughed, really laughed for the first time since her abandonment. The sound surprised them both, ringing clear in the evening air. That's a good sound, Eli said quietly. You should laugh more. Haven't had much cause lately. No, I suppose not. He set aside his carbine and pulled out his Navy Colt. Come here. Time you learn to use this. Clara hesitated. I don't want to kill anyone. Neither do I. That's not what this is about. Sometimes you need to signal for help, scare off animals, make noise to be found. A gun's a tool. Clara, how you use it determines whether it brings death or saves lives. He showed her how to load the percussion caps, how to aim, the proper stance to absorb the recoil. Clara's first shot went wide, the kick stronger than she expected, but she adjusted, and her second shot hit the target he'd set up an old tin can on a rock. Natural talent, Eli said approvingly. Your father taught you well. As darkness fell and they prepared their bedrolls, Clara surprised herself by speaking. Would you like to hear something a poem? I know many by heart. Eli looked uncertain. I'm not educated in such things. Poetry isn't about education. It's about feeling something true. She settled against her saddle, gazing at the emerging stars. This one's by William Cullen Bryant. So live, that when thy summons comes to join the innumerable caravan which moves to that mysterious realm where each shall take his chamber in the silent halls of death, thou go not, like the quarry slave at night, scourged to his dungeon, but sustained and soothed by an unfaltering trust. Approach thy grave like one who wraps the drapery of his couch about him and lies down to pleasant dreams. Eli finished quietly. Clara stared at him in amazement. My wife loved that poem, he explained. Read it so often I learned it without meaning to. He was quiet for a moment. Haven't thought of it in years. They sat in companionable silence, the wind rustling through the cottonwood leaves. Clara was about to prepare for sleep when she noticed Eli staring at something beyond their camp. Following his gaze, she saw the blackened skeleton of a cabin, barely visible in the moonlight. Homestead, Eli said grimly. Burned out, probably last year by the look of it. They approached carefully the next morning. Though it was clear the place had been abandoned for months. The fire had taken most of the structure, but evidence of the life lived there remained broken dishes. The iron frame of a bed. A child's toy horse carved from wood and miraculously unburned. Clara picked up the toy, her throat tight. There were children here. Eli agreed heavily. He'd found something near what had been the door bones, scattered by scavengers but unmistakably human. We should bury them. Whatever happened here, they deserved that much. They worked in solemn silence, gathering what remains they could find. Eli fashioned a rough cross from salvaged lumber while Clara gathered stones to mark the grave. Neither speculated about what had happened: disease, accident, or human violence. It didn't matter now. When they'd finished, Clara recited the 23rd Psalm from memory while Eli stood with his hat in his hands. The wind had calmed, and the morning sun cast long shadows across the prairie. As they prepared to leave, Clara placed the carved horse on the grave marker. So someone knows a child was loved here, she explained when Eli looked at her questioningly. They traveled several miles before either spoke again. Finally, Eli said, You did right back there, remembering them with dignity. That matters. Everyone deserves to be mourned, Clara replied. To have someone mark their passing. Not everyone gets it. No, she agreed. But when we can give it, we should. That evening, As storm clouds gathered on the horizon, Eli's prediction finally came true. The wind picked up suddenly, fierce and cold, bringing the smell of rain. The paint horse grew restless, pulling at its hobbles and whinnying nervously. Clara moved without thinking, approaching the frightened animal with calm purpose. She spoke softly, nonsense words of comfort, her hands steady on its neck despite the lightning that split the sky. The horse tried to rear, but she held firm, never flinching even when thunder crashed directly overhead. "Easy now," she murmured, maintaining contact as Eli had taught her. "Just noise and light, nothing that can hurt you. We're safe here, all of us safe." Gradually, the horse calmed, though it continued to tremble. Clara stayed with it, patient and unmoving, until the storm passed. When she finally returned to the shelter Eli had rigged with his oilcloth slicker, she found him watching her with an expression she'd never seen before. "You've got steady hands, Clara," he said, his voice carrying weight beyond the simple words. "Steady heart, too." "I learned from a good teacher," she replied. But they both knew it was more than that. The scared, abandoned woman from a week ago wouldn't have approached a panicked horse in a storm. Something was changing in her, confidence growing with each passing day and each skill mastered. As they settled in for the night, the storm having passed to the east, Clara realized she no longer thought of herself as a burden Eli was carrying to safety. She was becoming his partner, contributing skills and strength of her own. The journey to Willow Creek stretched ahead, but for the first time, she wasn't eager for it to end. The storm arrived without warning on their 10th day, though Eli had been watching the sky uneasily since dawn. Dark clouds massed on the horizon like an advancing army, and the air grew heavy with the promise of violence. They were crossing open country, miles from any natural shelter, when the first fat drops began to fall. There, Eli pointed through the increasing rain to a dark shape against a low rise. "Line shack, if we're lucky." They reached it just as the sky opened in earnest, rain falling in sheets that turned the ground to mud within minutes. The shack was small but solid, built by some cattle outfit for their riders working the far ranges. The door hung askew, but the roof looked intact, a miracle on the frontier where abandoned buildings usually deteriorated quickly. Eli pushed the door open carefully, checking for current inhabitants, human or animal. Finding it empty save for mice droppings and old cobwebs, he pulled Clara inside just as lightning split the sky with a crack that made the walls shake. The single room held a rusty stove, a narrow bunk with moldering straw tick, a rough table, and 2 crates that served as chairs. Someone had left supplies, a few cans of beans gone rusty, a tin of Bull Durham tobacco, hardtack wrapped in oilcloth that might still be edible. Most precious of all, a stack of dry wood beside the stove. "We'll wait it out," Eli said, already working to start a fire. "This kind of storm could last days." Clara wrung water from her skirts, shivering in the sudden cold. The temperature had dropped 20 degrees in as many minutes, and her wet clothes clung unpleasantly. She noticed Eli favoring his left shoulder as he worked with the kindling, the same shoulder she'd seen him rubbing on cold mornings. "Let me," she said, taking the matches from him. "You're hurting." "Old wound. Acts up in weather like this." He surrendered the task reluctantly, settling on one of the crates with visible relief. Clara got the fire going quickly, the warmth filling the small space. She explored their temporary refuge while Eli saw to the horse. Finding treasures previous occupants had left a deck of worn playing cards, 2 tallow candles, even a ceramic crock that might have once held sourdough starter. On a shelf, wrapped in yellowed newspaper, she discovered a small sewing kit and a bar of lye soap. "We could be here a while," Eli said when he returned, soaked through despite his slicker. "Seen storms like this last a week." The thought should have frightened Clara, trapped in close quarters with a man she'd known barely 10 days. Instead, she felt oddly calm. They'd developed a rhythm together, an understanding that made the forced intimacy feel less threatening than it might have been. She spread their belongings to dry, creating order in the cramped space. Using the old straw tick as a base, she fashioned a more comfortable sitting area near the stove. Their blankets, once dry, would make adequate bedding. The cans of beans, combined with their supplies, would stretch for several days if needed. "You've made it almost homey," Eli observed, watching her work. "My mother always said any space could be made comfortable with effort and imagination." Clara hung their wet outer clothes on nails protruding from the walls, though I doubt she ever imagined something quite like this. That first evening, as rain hammered the roof and wind rattled the single window's broken shutters, they played cards by candlelight. Eli taught her a game called Casino that his regiment had played during quiet times. His shoulder was clearly paining him. She could see it in the tightness around his eyes, the way he held himself carefully. "Does it hurt much?" she asked finally. "Took a mini ball at Antietam." He shifted uncomfortably. "Army surgeon dug it out, but said fragments might still be in there. Usually doesn't trouble me except when storms come. I have some carbolic salve in my things, and whiskey for cleaning. Might help if you'd let me look at it." Eli hesitated so long she thought he'd refuse. Then, slowly, he unbuttoned his shirt. The scar was ugly, puckered and red even after all these years. But worse was the swelling around it, the skin hot to the touch. Clara fetched her supplies, grateful her mother had insisted she learn basic doctoring. "This will hurt," she warned, soaking a cloth with whiskey. "Can't hurt worse than getting it," Eli replied, then sucked in breath sharply as she began cleaning the wound. She worked carefully, feeling the abnormal hardness under the skin that might indeed be metal fragments working their way out. As she applied the salve, she began to hum unconsciously an old lullaby her mother had sung when Clara or her brother were hurt or sick. "Sleep, my child, and peace attend thee all through the night," she sang softly, the words coming unbidden. "Guardian angels God will send thee all through the night." Eli's breathing, which had been tight with pain, gradually eased. When she looked up, his weathered face had softened. Eyes closed not in pain but in something like peace. "Haven't heard kindness in so long," he whispered. "I'd forgotten its sound." Clara's hands stilled. The intimacy of the moment, her hands on his bare skin, his vulnerability, the gentleness between them suddenly overwhelmed her. She finished quickly, helping him back into his shirt. "Thank you," he said simply, but the words carried weight. The storm continued through the night and all the next day. They settled into an unexpected domesticity, taking turns tending the fire, preparing meals from their limited supplies, reading aloud from Clara's Bible, the only book between them. The forced proximity wore down walls they'd both carefully maintained. On the second night, as they played another hand of Casino, Eli spoke suddenly. "Sarah was 23 when she died. Jenny was 4. Clara set down her cards. Understanding this was not a moment for games. "Typhoid fever," the neighbors wrote, "swept through while I was somewhere in Virginia, fighting for grand ideals." His voice carried no bitterness, just infinite weariness. "They were dead 2 months before I even knew they were sick. Buried by strangers while I was shooting at boys no older than Sarah had been." "You couldn't have known," Clara said gently. "No, but I chose to go. Chose the war over staying home. Said it was duty, said it was necessary. Maybe it was. But they died without me either way." He studied his cards as though they held answers. "Haven't been able to stay put since. Every time I try, I see them Sarah hanging wash that'll never dry. Jenny playing with cornhusk dolls. Easier to keep moving." Clara understood the weight of that confession, the trust it represented. She owed him equal honesty. "Thomas and I were childhood sweethearts," she said. "Everyone assumed we'd marry. When he proposed, I said yes because it was expected, because I couldn't imagine any other life. But 2 weeks before the wedding, he caught fever. I nursed him for 3 days, and She paused, gathering courage. "I felt relief mixed with my grief. Relief that I wouldn't have to marry a man I loved but wasn't in love with. And I've hated myself for that relief for 10 years. Eli looked at her with surprise but no judgment. That's a heavy burden to carry. My brother thought I was pining for Thomas all these years. The truth was worse, I was frozen by guilt, unable to move forward or back. Easier to be the tragic spinster than admit I was relieved to be free. They sat in silence, rain drumming steadily above them. Finally, Eli gathered the cards, shuffling slowly. We're a pair, aren't we? Me running from ghosts, you frozen by them. Yet here we are, Clara observed. Neither running nor frozen. No, he agreed. Here we are. On the third day, the storm began to weaken. They'd fallen into comfortable rhythms, Clara mending their clothes while Eli told stories of his travels, sharing meals that grew more elaborate as Clara experimented with their supplies. Long evenings of cards and conversation. That morning, Clara noticed Eli working on something, his knife careful as he shaped leather. When she looked closer, she saw he was fashioning new heel supports for her boots, using strips from his own saddle repair kit. These are wearing through, he explained, almost embarrassed to be caught in the thoughtful act. Whalebone stays from a corset would work better, but leather will do for now. You're ruining your repair supplies for my boots. They're good boots, worth maintaining. He didn't look at her as he worked. Besides, we've still got miles ahead. You'll need solid footwear. As she watched him work, this man who'd been a stranger 10 days ago, now carefully repairing her boots, Clara felt something shift in her chest. Not love, not yet, but the possibility of it. The recognition that somehow, in this cramped shack while storm winds howled, they'd moved from wary alliance to genuine partnership. That afternoon, as Eli tested the repair and Clara packed their now dry belongings. The rain finally stopped. Sunlight broke through clouds for the first time in 3 days, streaming through the cracked window to pool on the floor. We can leave tomorrow, Eli announced, though he didn't sound entirely pleased. Ground needs to dry some, but we should make up lost time. Clara nodded, surprised by her own reluctance. These 3 days of enforced intimacy had created something precious, a space where they could speak truthfully, exist without pretense, care for each other without questioning why. Eli, she said as they prepared their last dinner in the shack, I'm glad we found this place. He understood she meant more than just shelter from the storm. So am I, Clara. So am I. That night, as they played their final hand of cards before sleep, Clara noticed Eli no longer held himself so carefully. The shoulder still hurt, it probably always would, but something else had eased. Some internal wound beginning to heal. And she felt different too. The frozen places inside her were thawing, warmed by simple kindness and the revolutionary act of being seen clearly and not found wanting. Tomorrow they would continue to Willow Creek. But tonight, in a drafty line shack that had become their temporary world, they were just Eli and Clara, 2 damaged souls discovering that perhaps they didn't have to carry their wounds alone. The candle flickered between them as Eli dealt the cards one more time, and Clara found herself humming that lullaby again. This time, Eli hummed along, his rough voice finding harmony with hers. It wasn't beautiful, but it was theirs, and that was enough. Outside, stars emerged from behind clearing clouds, and the vast prairie settled into peaceful silence. Inside, 2 people who'd started as strangers played cards and shared the comfortable quiet of those who've learned to trust. Their shadows dancing together on rough wooden walls that had witnessed this small miracle of human connection. 2 weeks into their journey, the landscape had begun to show signs of civilization's creeping reach. Fence posts appeared occasionally, though the wire had long since been scavenged or rusted away. Wagon ruts crossed their path more frequently, and Eli's vigilance increased proportionally. Mackey's trading post is half a day ahead, he announced that morning, checking his rifle for the 3rd time. We need supplies, flour, salt, ammunition, but trading posts. He paused, choosing words carefully. They attract all types. Drifters, soldiers mustered out with nowhere to go, Men looking for trouble or running from it. I could wait with the horse, Clara offered, understanding his concern. No. The word came sharp and immediate. You stay close to me. A woman alone is a target. A woman with a man's protection gets respect, even if grudging. Had Clara noticed he'd said protection, not ownership, and appreciated the distinction. She'd learned to read the subtle ways Eli showed respect, always announcing himself before approaching when she was bathing at streams, asking her opinion on routes and camping spots, never assuming authority despite his greater trail experience. They smelled Mackey's before they saw it would smoke, horses, the distinctive odor of too many people in too small a space with too little washing. The trading post squatted like a toad beside a muddy creek, its log walls dark with age and weather. A dozen horses stood at the hitch rail, and Clara could hear rough male laughter from inside. Keep your bonnet forward, eyes down but not too far down, Eli instructed quietly. Look scared and you're prey. Look bold and you're a challenge. Find the middle ground. Clara adjusted her bonnet, hiding most of her face while maintaining enough visibility to navigate. She'd learned to trust Eli's instincts about people the way she trusted his knowledge of trails and weather. The inside of Mackey's was dim despite the afternoon sun, windows being scarce and those few covered with oiled paper rather than glass. The main room held a long counter backed by shelves of goods, bolts of cloth, tools, patent medicines in bottles promising miraculous cures, tins of food, and barrels of pickles and crackers. Men clustered around a table where some sort of game was in progress, and their conversation stopped as Eli and Clara entered. "Afternoon," the man behind the counter called out. He was massive, with arms like ham hocks and a beard that hadn't seen trimming in months. "Tom Mackey. What can I do for you folks?" "Need supplies," Eli replied, his voice carrying the same careful neutrality Clara had heard him use with the horse, calm, steady, giving nothing away. "Flour, salt, ammunition for a Spencer carbine, coffee if you have it. Got all that?" Mackey's eyes shifted to Clara, taking in her worn but quality dress, her carefully mended gloves. "Your missus looks like she could use some proper goods. Got a new shipment of fabric just in from Denver. Some fancy soap, too, the kind ladies appreciate." Clara felt Eli tense beside her at the assumption, but neither corrected it. Easier to let strangers think what they would than explain their actual arrangement. "We'll look at what you have," Eli said simply. As Mackey began pulling items from shelves, a woman emerged from a door behind the counter. She was perhaps 40, with the hard-worn look of frontier wives who'd buried dreams along with children. Her eyes immediately fixed on Clara with the calculating gaze of someone cataloging every detail for later gossip. "Well now," the woman said, her voice carrying false sweetness. "Don't often see ladies out this way. I'm Mrs. Mackey. You folks heading to Willow Creek?" "Yes, ma'am," Clara replied politely. "Long journey for a married couple. Course, you are married, aren't you? Wouldn't be proper. A man and woman traveling alone together otherwise." Her eyes glittered with malicious curiosity. Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks, but kept her voice steady. "We're traveling to Willow Creek on business." "Business." Mrs. Mackey drew out the word like she was tasting something sour. "That's what they're calling it now." Two other women had appeared, drawn by the scent of potential scandal like vultures to carrion. They whispered behind their hands, eyes dissecting Clara's appearance, the dress worn from travel, the lack of a wedding ring, the way she stood just slightly apart from Eli, rather than claiming a wife's natural position at his side. "Seems to me," one of them said loud enough to carry, "decent women don't travel with men who aren't their husbands. Unless they're not decent women." Clara's hands clenched in her skirts, but before she could respond, Eli stepped smoothly between her and the gossips. His movement was casual but deliberate, his body now a wall between Clara and their judgment. "This lady travels under my protection," he said, his voice still calm but carrying an edge that made the room take notice. "She's shown more courage in the last 2 weeks than most people manage in a lifetime. faced down storms, rough country, and troubles that would have broken spirits twice as proud as yours. He turned to look directly at Mrs. Mackey. Now, she needs a new dress for the traveling, something practical but proper. I'd appreciate you showing her what you have while I settle accounts with your husband. The women exchanged glances, clearly wanting to continue their inquisition but wary of pushing too hard. Eli's quiet authority and the way the men at the gaming table had stopped to listen gave them pause. Mrs. Mackey led Clara to a corner where bolts of fabric were displayed. As Clara examined them, aware of continued whispers and stares, she heard Eli talking with Mackey. "That's a good woman you got there," Mackey was saying. "Bit thin for frontier life, but they toughen up or they don't last." "She's already tougher than she looks," Eli replied. "And she's not my woman. She's her own person who happens to be traveling under my protection." Clara's hands stilled on a bolt of brown linsey woolsey, surprised by his correction. Most men would have taken the easier path of assumed ownership. She selected practical fabric wool for warmth, sturdy enough to last. When she returned to the counter, she found Eli had already gathered their supplies, including a small luxury tin of peppermint sticks and a bar of Pear's soap that must have cost dear this far from civilization. "Thought you might like these," he said quietly, almost shy about the gifts. One of the gossiping women laughed. "Look at that, trying to buy her affections with candy like she's a child." This time Clara spoke for herself. "A kind gesture from a good man is worth more than all the respectability you wrap around yourselves like armor." She looked directly at each woman in turn. "You stand here in safety, judging those who take risks you'd never dare. That's not respectability. It's cowardice dressed in righteous clothing." Eli's hand touched her elbow gently. "We should go." But Tom Mackey was pulling something from beneath the counter, a wool dress in deep blue, well made with careful stitching. "Had this on consignment from a woman who didn't make it through last winter. Fever took her. Seems about your size. Miss, I'll trade it for that Navy Colt your man's carrying. Good weapon like that's worth more than fabric out here." "That's too much," Clara protested, knowing Eli valued that pistol, but Eli was already unhooking the gun belt. "Winter's coming. You'll need something warmer than what you have." He handed over the weapon without hesitation. "Fair trade." As they loaded their supplies, Clara noticed how the men at the gaming table watched with new interest. Not the leering attention she'd feared, but something more like respect. Eli had claimed her protection without claiming her, defended her honor while acknowledging her independence. In this rough place where women were property or problems, he'd presented a third option that confused and intrigued them. They made camp 5 miles from the trading post, far enough to avoid unwanted visitors, but close enough to the trail for safety. As Clara prepared their meal with the new supplies, fresh flour for biscuits, salt pork that wasn't completely rancid, real coffee instead of their dwindling supply, she kept thinking about the encounter. "Thank you," she said finally. "For what you said back there." Eli was cleaning his rifle, movements automatic after years of practice. No need for thanks, spoke only truth. "You gave up your pistol for a dress I don't need. You need it more than I need an extra gun. Besides," he added with a slight smile, "that blue will bring out your eyes." Clara felt warmth flood her cheeks. In 2 weeks of travel, it was the first purely personal compliment he'd offered. That's hardly practical reasoning. Maybe not everything has to be practical. He set aside the rifle, looking at her directly. "Clara, those women back there, what they said doesn't matter. It does, though. Society has rules, and we're breaking them. In their eyes. You're compromised just by traveling with me. When we reach Willow Creek, I'll face what comes." Clara poured coffee, the good smell filling their small camp. "Eli, I spent 10 years following every rule of respectability. Wore mourning for a man I didn't truly love. Kept house for a brother who saw me as furniture. Turned down suitors my heart didn't want because accepting would have been sensible. Where did respectability get me? abandoned at a wagon crossing with nothing but a trunk and 3 days of water. She handed him the coffee cup, their fingers brushing in the exchange. You've treated me with more genuine respect in 2 weeks than I received in years of being respectable. You ask my opinion. You trust my judgment. You see me as capable rather than delicate. If that's not respectable by society's standards, then perhaps society needs better standards. Eli was quiet for a long moment, studying his coffee as if it held profound secrets. You know what I think? I think respectability and decency aren't the same thing at all. Decent folk help others, share what they have, judge people by their actions, not their circumstances. Respectable folk. He gestured back toward the trading post. They follow rules that make them feel superior, while their hearts shrivel up like fruit left too long in the sun. Is that why you drift to avoid becoming respectable? Maybe. He considered the question seriously. Or maybe I've been looking for someone who understood the difference between real worth and society's version of it. The weight of that admission settled between them. Clara knew they were approaching something larger than friendship, deeper than mere travel companionship. The careful boundaries they'd maintained were becoming harder to defend, not from external pressure but from internal recognition. Try on the dress, Eli said suddenly, breaking the moment's intensity. Make sure it fits before we get too far to trade back. Clara took the dress behind a cluster of sage bushes. The wool was soft, well made, with small details that spoke of its original owner's pride-covered buttons. Reinforced seams, a small pocket hidden in the skirt. It fit as though made for her, and the deep blue did indeed complement her coloring, though she'd never admit to checking her reflection in Eli's small shaving mirror. When she emerged, Eli's expression told her everything his words didn't. He looked at her the way a man looks at something precious and unexpected, surprise mixed with a kind of wonder. It suits you, he said simply, but his eyes said more. That night, as they settled into their established routine, Eli taking first watch while Clara prepared for sleep, she thought about respectability and its costs. The women at the trading post would sleep in proper beds beside proper husbands, secure in their social standing. But Clara, lying on hard ground with only stars for a roof, felt freer than she had in years. Eli, she called softly. Yes. I'm glad you're not respectable. His quiet laugh carried across the darkness. So am I, Clara. So am I. Tomorrow would bring more trails, more challenges. Willow Creek drew closer with each mile. But tonight, wrapped in a dress bought with a treasured pistol, gifted by a man who saw her worth beyond society's measurements, Clara felt rich in ways that had nothing to do with respectability and everything to do with being truly seen and valued. The stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns, indifferent to human conventions. And two people who'd found each other outside society's boundaries continued their journey toward something neither could quite name, but both were beginning to hope might be home. 16 days into their journey, with Willow Creek now only a week away, Clara woke in the pre-dawn darkness to find Eli's bedroll empty. This wasn't unusual. He often scouted their path at first light, but something made her lie still, listening. She heard his voice, low and conversational, coming from where the horse was hobbled. Should have left her at the trading post, Eli was saying, and Clara's heart clenched. Would have been kinder in the long run. Mackie would have found someone heading to Willow Creek, someone who wouldn't. He paused, and Clara heard him sigh. Someone who wouldn't make her look at me the way she does, like I'm worth something more than just another drifter. The paint horse snorted, and Eli continued, his voice carrying the weight of a confession meant for no human ears. Getting too comfortable, old friend. Starting to think about things I've got no right to, settling down, building something, having someone to come home to at the day's end. Dangerous thinking for men like us. Clara heard him moving around, probably checking the horse's hooves as he did each morning. She's got family in Willow Creek. An aunt, probably. Though she hasn't said much, she'll be safe there. Respectable again. Better off without someone like me casting shadows on her reputation. Should probably leave once I see her safely delivered. Head north maybe, toward Montana. Heard there's work there for men who don't ask questions and don't stay long. The sound of footsteps moving away from camp made Clara sit up. She could pretend she hadn't heard. Let this revelation fester between them unspoken. But 2 weeks of Eli's honest dealings had taught her the value of facing truth directly. She rose, wrapping her shawl around her shoulders against the morning chill. Her mended stockings hung on sage bushes where she'd left them to dry, and she pulled them on quickly before following the direction Eli had gone. She found him by the small stream that ran near their camp, standing with his back to her, hat in his hands. The first pink light of dawn was just touching the eastern sky, turning the water to molten copper. "Running away already?" she asked quietly. Eli spun around, his face showing surprise, then resignation as he realized what she must have heard. "How much did you—" "Enough." Clara moved closer, careful to maintain some distance. "Enough to know you're planning to abandon me in Willow Creek, just like my brother abandoned me at that wagon crossing." "It's not the same." "Isn't it?" The hurt she'd been holding back bled into her voice. "Making decisions about my future without consulting me. Determining what's best for me based on your own fears." "I'm trying to protect you," Eli said, his voice rough. "You don't understand what it would mean. Being associated with someone like me, I've got nothing. Clara, no home, no prospects. Just a horse and a talent for surviving. You deserve better than be—" "Stop!" Clara's voice cut through his words. "Stop telling me what I deserve. I'm 32 years old. Eli, I've been told what I deserve my whole life. I deserve a proper husband. I deserve a respectable home. I deserve the life others think I should want. But no one ever asked what I actually want. What do you want?" The question came out almost desperate. Clara studied him in the growing light, this man who'd shown her more kindness in 2 weeks than she'd known in years, who'd traded his pistol for her comfort, who treated her as an equal rather than a burden. "I want to stop being afraid," she said finally. "I want to choose my own path instead of having it chosen for me. I want—" She paused, gathering courage. "I want to see where this leads, whatever this is between us. But I can't do that if you're already planning your escape." Eli set his hat on a rock and ran his hands through his hair. A gesture she'd learned meant he was struggling with something important. "Clara, I haven't stayed in one place for 7 years. 7 years of drifting, never letting myself care about anything that couldn't fit in saddlebags. Then you come along, and suddenly I'm thinking about gardens and fences and watching seasons change from the same spot. It terrifies me." "You think I'm not terrified?" Clara moved closer, close enough to see the pain in his eyes. "I've been frozen in place so long I'd forgotten what it felt like to move forward. Then you appeared, and everything I thought I knew about myself started changing. I'm scared too. Eli, scared of hoping, scared of wanting something I might not get to keep." "Losing people leaves marks," Eli said quietly, repeating words from days before. "Yes," Clara agreed. "But maybe that's why we understand each other. We both know the cost of caring. We're choosing it anyway." The sun broke fully over the horizon, painting the landscape gold. Eli looked at her for a long moment, then slowly knelt beside the stream, cupping water in his hands and letting it run through his fingers. "I'm scared of hoping too, Clara," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "Scared that if I let myself believe in something good again, it'll be taken away. But maybe that's why we should try. Because we're both scared. Because we both know what we're risking." Clara knelt beside him, not touching, but close enough that she could feel his warmth. "I have an aunt in Willow Creek, my mother's sister. She wrote once, years ago, after Mother died. Said I could come if I ever needed refuge. But that was before I became the spinster who spent a decade mourning a man she didn't love. I don't know what kind of welcome awaits me, if any. And if there's no welcome, Then I'll make my own way. Find work, maybe. Seamstressing, teaching, whatever's needed. She paused, then added quietly, unless there were other options. Eli turned to look at her directly. There's abandoned homestead land near Willow Creek. I passed through 5 years ago. Noticed several claims that had been left to go back to prairie. Good land, water access. A person could file claim, build something real. A person or two people. The question hung between them in the morning air. Eli reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand. His palm was calloused, warm, steady. I've been drifting without purpose for 7 years, he said. You've been frozen in place for 10. Maybe together we could find a middle ground. Something neither of us could manage alone. Clara squeezed his hand gently. Is that a proposal, Mr. Eli? It's a possibility, he replied carefully. A thought that we could explore once we reach Willow Creek. See what's there, what's available. Make decisions based on facts rather than fears. They sat by the stream as the camp behind them began to stir with morning sounds, the horse nickering for attention, birds calling from the sage. Clara was acutely aware of Eli's hand in hers, the first intentional, intimate touch they'd shared. I need you to promise something, she said. What's that? No more planning to leave without discussing it with me. No more deciding what's best for me without my input. If we're going to explore possibilities, we do it as partners, equal partners. Eli smiled then, a real smile that transformed his weathered face. You drive a hard bargain, Miss Clara. I learned from a good teacher, she replied, echoing words from days past. They returned to camp together, hands releasing as they neared their supplies, but something fundamental shifted between them. As Clara prepared breakfast, she noticed Eli pull out his pencil stub and the piece of brown paper he'd been using to mark their route. What are you doing? She asked. Planning, he said. Marking where those abandoned homesteads were, just in case. Clara smiled, returning to her task. The tin mirror propped against their supplies caught her reflection, and she barely recognized herself. The woman looking back wasn't the abandoned spinster from the wagon crossing or the frozen creature who'd lived in her brother's shadow. This was someone new, weather-worn but strong, uncertain but brave. That evening, as they made camp in a grove of cottonwoods, the atmosphere between them had changed. The careful distance they'd maintained was still there, but it felt chosen now rather than fearful. They worked together with the easy efficiency of long partnership, but underneath ran an awareness of possibility. Tell me about the homesteads, Clara said as they ate their simple meal. Eli pulled out his makeshift map, pointing to marks he'd made. 3 adjoining claims here, about 4 miles from town. Original settlers gave up after the drought of '73. Land's been empty since. Good soil, though. I remember wild roses growing where their garden used to be. Nature trying to reclaim it, but the bones of something good still there. Roses, Clara murmured. My mother loved roses. Said they were proof that beautiful things could be strong. These were wild ones, tougher than any garden variety, like they were waiting for someone to appreciate them again. As night fell and they prepared their bedrolls, Clara made a decision. Instead of maintaining their usual distance, she placed her bedding closer to his, not scandalously close, but near enough that they could talk without raising voices. Is this acceptable? She asked. Eli looked at the arrangement, understanding the gesture. More than acceptable. They lay under the vast canopy of stars, the night sounds of the prairie surrounding them, for the first time since their journey began. The silence between them felt completely comfortable, not the careful quiet of strangers or the tentative peace of new allies, but the restful stillness of 2 people who'd found their way through fear to something resembling trust. Eli, Clara said into the darkness. Yes. Whatever happens in Willow Creek with my aunt, with the homesteads, with us, I want you to know something. These weeks with you have been the first time in my life I've felt truly free. Not abandoned, not rescued, free. That's a gift I'll carry regardless of what comes next. She heard him shift, could imagine him looking up at the stars. You gave me something too, Clara. For 7 years I've been a ghost, haunting my own life. You made me remember what it feels like to be real again, to want things beyond the next meal and the next mile. Then we're even. No, Eli said softly. Not even. But maybe that's good. Maybe the best things aren't about keeping score, but about giving what you can and accepting what's offered. Clara smiled in the darkness. That sounds like something a wise man would say. Just a drifter learning to stop drifting, Eli replied. With a good teacher. Tomorrow would bring them closer to Willow Creek and all the uncertainties waiting there. But tonight, under the eternal stars, two people who'd started as strangers lay near each other in chosen trust, no longer planning escape routes but tentatively sketching maps toward a shared future. The journey that had begun in abandonment and desperation had become something neither had expected, a path toward home, whatever form that might take. The morning of their 21st day brought Willow Creek into view from the ridge above. Clara reined in the paint horse she'd been riding, her hands tightening on the leather until her knuckles went white. Below them, the town spread out in the valley, perhaps 36 buildings clustered around a main street, smoke rising from chimneys, the ordinary bustle of frontier life clearly visible even from this distance. There it is, Eli said unnecessarily, standing beside the horse with one hand on its neck. Bigger than I remembered. Clara couldn't speak. After 3 weeks of trail and wilderness, the sight of civilization should have brought relief. Instead, her stomach churned with anxiety. Somewhere down there was her Aunt Margaret, her mother's sister who'd written that single letter years ago. A woman Clara barely remembered from childhood, now her only living relative willing to acknowledge her existence. We don't have to go straight in, Eli said, reading her tension. Could make camp here. Give you time to prepare. No, Clara forced herself to dismount, her legs unsteady after hours of riding. Waiting won't make it easier. They stood together on the ridge, the October wind pulling at Clara's skirts and Eli's worn duster. Below them, Willow Creek looked established, permanent, everything their journey had not been. Clara could see a church steeple, a schoolhouse, what appeared to be a bank, a real town with real rules about propriety and women's places. Clara, Eli's voice was careful. Before we go down there, I need to tell you something. She turned to face him, noting how he held his hat in his hands the way he did when something mattered. Those homesteads I mentioned, I didn't just pass by them 5 years ago. I spent a month there, seriously considering filing claim myself. He gestured southwest of the town. The middle claim has a cabin, mostly sound though the roof needs work. Good well, already dug. Apple trees someone planted that have gone wild but still bear fruit. The land's been waiting, like it knows someone will come back. Why didn't you claim it then? Wasn't ready to stop moving, wasn't ready to hope. He met her eyes directly. I am now, if you are. But I need you to know you have choices. Your aunt's house isn't your only option. Clara looked back at the town, then at the man beside her. 3 weeks ago. She'd been too desperate to question his help. Now she knew him as nightmares and kindnesses, his fears and steadiness, the way he hummed when content, how his eyes crinkled when he truly smiled. Tell me honestly, she said, if I choose my aunt's charity, will you claim that homestead anyway? Eli was quiet for a long moment. No, he admitted. Without you, it's just another empty piece of land. I'd likely drift on, find work somewhere until the restlessness took me again. And if I choose the homestead with you, what exactly are you offering? He turned to face her fully, his expression serious. Partnership. We'd file adjoining claims, work them together, build something real, in time. If you wanted, we could make it official. But that would be your choice, when and if you're ready. I'm not asking you to compromise yourself, Clara. I'm asking you to build something with me. The wind gusted, sending Clara's bonnet strings flying. She caught them, using the moment to gather courage. Let me see what my aunt offers first. I owe her that much for the letter she sent. But Eli, she reached out, touching his sleeve briefly. Wait for me. Whatever happens, wait. I'll wait, he promised. Long as it takes. They descended into Willow Creek at midday, drawing curious stares as they made their way down Main Street. Clara, riding the paint horse while Eli walked alongside, knew what they looked like, trail-worn strangers, ambiguous relationship, her lack of wedding ring visible to anyone who cared to look. Margaret Thornton's house sat on Maple Street, 2 blocks from the Mercantile. It was exactly what Clara had expected: white-painted boards, green shutters, a front garden maintained with military precision. Everything about it spoke of rigid respectability. That's it, Clara said, recognizing the house from her aunt's description. Eli helped her down from the horse, his hands lingering just a moment on her waist. I'll wait at the Mercantile. Take whatever time you need. Don't go far, Clara said, sudden fear gripping her. I won't. He squeezed her hand quickly, a gesture hidden from watching eyes by the horse's bulk. Courage, Clara. She walked up the graveled path on trembling legs. Before she could knock, the door opened. Margaret Thornton stood there, and Clara saw her own mother's face, aged differently, harder, sharper, with none of the warmth Clara remembered. Clara, her aunt's voice was flat. I heard there was a woman riding into town with a drifter. I should have known. Aunt Margaret. Clara tried to smile. Thank you for... Come inside before more people see you. Margaret stepped back, her expression pinched. Though I suspect the damage is already done. The interior was exactly as Clara had imagined: dark wood, heavy curtains, every surface covered with doilies and Dresden figures. It smelled of lemon oil and disapproval. Margaret led her to a stark parlor, not offering refreshment or even a seat. You're older than I expected, Margaret said bluntly. And your appearance, have you been living rough? I've been traveling, the wagon train I was with. Yes, I can imagine. Your brother wrote that he could no longer support you. I must say, I understand his position. An unmarried woman your age is a significant burden. Margaret's eyes narrowed. And now you arrive with a man who is clearly not your husband. Do you have any idea what people will say? Clara straightened her spine. Mr. Morrison has been nothing but honorable. He protected me, taught me. I'm sure he taught you many things. The insinuation was clear. Well, you're here now. I suppose Christian charity demands I offer you shelter, though the conditions will be strict. You'll help with all household duties, of course. No wages your keep will be payment enough. You'll attend church twice on Sundays and Wednesday prayer meetings. You will not associate with any men, and you'll wear proper mourning to explain your unmarried state. In time, perhaps the town will forget your arrival, though I doubt you'll ever be truly respectable again. Clara listened to the litany of restrictions, feeling the walls of the house pressing in. This was safety, she reminded herself. This was family, however cold. There are also my social obligations to consider, Margaret continued. The Ladies' Aid Society, the Temperance Union. You'll attend but not speak unless directly addressed. Your presence will be trial enough without adding your opinions. She paused, studying Clara with distaste. That dress is completely inappropriate. You'll wear black, high-necked, nothing that might attract attention. I have some old mourning clothes that might fit. For how long? Clara asked quietly. For as long as you shelter under my roof. Indefinitely, I assume. Where else would you go? Clara thought of Eli waiting at the Mercantile, probably studying the wedding rings in the display case they'd passed. She thought of wild roses growing where gardens used to be, of apple trees bearing fruit with no one to harvest them, of building something real with someone who saw her as a partner rather than a burden. I need a moment to consider, Clara said. Consider. Margaret's voice rose. What is there to consider? You're a spinster with no money. no prospects, and a thoroughly compromised reputation. I'm offering you respectability, or at least its shadow. You should be grateful." "I am grateful," Clara said carefully. "But I need to—" "Is this about that man, the one you rode in with?" Margaret's face flushed with anger. "Don't be a fool, Clara. Men like that take what they want and leave. You think you're special to him? You're just convenient. A woman desperate enough to accept anything. When he's had his fill, he'll move on, and you'll come crawling back here. But my door won't open twice." Clara stood, her decision suddenly crystal clear. "Then I thank you for your single offer of charity. You're leaving to go where to him?" Margaret followed her to the door. "You're choosing ruin over family." "I'm choosing possibility over imprisonment," Clara replied. "I'm choosing someone who respects me over someone who sees only my failures. You'll regret this when you're abandoned again. Remember, you chose this path." Clara turned at the door, seeing her aunt clearly a woman so wrapped in respectability she'd forgotten how to be human. "I've been abandoned by people who were supposed to love me. But Eli has never left me. Not once. He's waiting right now, just as he promised. That's worth more than all your respectability." She left the house, walking steadily despite her shaking legs. 20 minutes had passed 20 minutes to see her life's alternative and reject it absolutely. Main Street stretched before her, and there was the mercantile with Eli standing outside, hat in hand, prepared to say goodbye if that's what she chose. Clara walked past him toward the building she'd noticed earlier, the land office. She heard his quick steps following. "Clara," she stopped, turning to face him. "Show me that homestead claim. We'll need 2 names on it." The surprise on his face shifted quickly to something deeper, joy mixed with disbelief. "You're sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything." She took his arm properly, publicly, not caring who saw. "Partners, you said—" "Equal partners." "Equal partners," he confirmed. The land office was small, staffed by a single clerk who looked up with interest as they entered. "Help you folks." "We need to file homestead claims," Eli said. 2 adjoining parcels, the old Hendricks and Morrison places off Cedar Creek. The clerk pulled out a thick ledger and forms. "Those have been vacant near 6 years. You sure about taking them on? Previous folks couldn't make it work." "Previous folks didn't have what we have," Clara said firmly. The paperwork was more complex than Clara had expected. Surveyor's measurements, water rights, improvement requirements. The clerk explained they'd need to build on each claim, cultivate a certain acreage, maintain residence for 5 years to gain full ownership. "Most folks claiming together like this are married," the clerk noted, his pen hovering over the forms. "We will be," Eli said quietly. "When the time's right." Clara signed her name with a steady hand, Clara Marie Bennett, then watched Eli sign his Elijah James Morrison. She'd never known his full name before, and something about seeing it in official ink made everything more real. "There's fees," the clerk said. $14 per claim." Eli pulled out his money pouch, counting carefully. They'd have barely enough left for basic supplies, but Clara didn't care. They were choosing their own poverty over someone else's charity. As they completed the transaction, several townspeople entered the office on other business. Clara heard whispers, saw the glances at her ringless finger, but she held her head high. Let them talk. She and Eli were building something real while they traded in gossip. "You folks will want to register at the mercantile," the clerk said, stamping their papers with official seals. "Henderson there extends credit to homesteaders. Knows you're good for it once you get established." They left the office with their papers' legal documents, making them landowners, partners in the most official sense possible. As they walked toward the mercantile, Clara noticed the wedding rings again in the window display, simple gold bands that caught the afternoon light. Eli followed her gaze. "Soon," he said quietly. "When you're ready. Not because anyone says we should. I know." She tucked her hand more firmly in his arm. "For now, this is enough. More than enough." They spent the rest of the afternoon at the mercantile, Mr. Henderson proving as accommodating as the clerk had suggested. He extended credit for basic tools, seed for spring planting, materials for roof repair. His wife, a plump woman with kind eyes, added practical goods canning jars, needles and thread, a proper medicine box. "You're the ones taking the old Hendricks place," Mrs. Henderson asked. "My sister tried to grow roses there once, said the soil was perfect for them." "There are wild roses there now," Eli said. "We plan to tend them properly." As they loaded their supplies, Clara felt the weight of watching eyes, heard the whispers following them. But she also saw something else, a grudging respect from some, particularly the women who'd made their own hard choices to survive on the frontier. "Your aunt turned you out, Mrs.?" Henderson asked quietly while Eli was loading the wagon they'd bought on credit. "I turned myself out," Clara corrected, "toward something better." The older woman studied her, then nodded slowly. "Good for you, dear. The respectable path isn't always the right one. You remember that when times get hard." As the sun began to sink toward the western mountains, Eli helped Clara onto the wagon seat. Their new life awaited 4 miles from town, 2 adjoining claims with a partially standing cabin, wild apple trees, and roses waiting to be tended. "Ready?" Eli asked, taking up the reins. Clara looked back once at Willow Creek, at her aunt's respectable prison, at the gossip still watching from windows, at the narrow life she'd nearly accepted from desperation. Then she looked forward, toward the man beside her and the land they'd claimed together. "I've been ready my whole life," she said. "I just didn't know it until now." As they drove toward their homestead, the setting sun painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, Clara felt the last chains of her old life falling away. She'd chosen risk over safety, partnership over charity, love over respectability. And for the first time in her 32 years, she felt truly, completely alive. The wagon path to their claims had nearly disappeared, reclaimed by prairie grass and sage, but Eli remembered the way. As they crested the small rise, Clara saw it a cabin standing in a valley beside a creek, its walls still straight despite years of abandonment. Wild roses tangled around the porch posts, their late blooms perfuming the October air. Apple trees, gnarled but heavy with fruit, created a natural orchard to the west. "It's real," Clara breathed, unable to quite believe that this place, this possibility, was theirs. "Needs work," Eli said, but she heard the hope in his voice. "Roof's got holes, chinking needs replacing, porches half rotted through, but the bones are sound." They pulled up before the cabin as the late afternoon sun slanted across the valley. The silence was different here than on the trail, not the emptiness of wilderness, but the expectant quiet of a place waiting to be lived in again. Clara climbed down from the wagon before Eli could help her, eager to explore. The front door hung on one hinge, and she pushed it open carefully. Dust motes danced in the light streaming through gaps in the roof. The main room held a stone fireplace, its hearth blackened by forgotten fires. A ladder led to a loft above. Through a doorway, she glimpsed a smaller room that might serve as a bedroom. "Look at this," she called, running her hand along the mantelpiece. Someone had carved wildflowers into the wood. Delicate work that spoke of long winter evenings and patient hands. Someone loved this place. Eli appeared in the doorway, carrying their first load of supplies. The Hendricks family, according to town records, lost their youngest to scarlet fever. Then the drought of '73 finished them. Heard they went back east. Clara moved to the kitchen area, where rough shelves still held abandoned treasures, mason jars clouded with age, a coffee grinder mounted to the wall, wooden spoons worn smooth by use. In a corner cupboard, wrapped in oilcloth, she found a packet of garden seeds, beans, squash, corn carefully saved but never planted. "They meant to come back," she said softly. "Places like this are full of intentions." Eli agreed. He'd found the root cellar entrance, pulling it open to reveal stone-lined walls still solid after years of neglect. But intentions don't build homes. Work does. Daily choosing does. They spent the remaining daylight taking inventory. The well water ran clear after Eli pumped out the rust. The barn, though missing boards, would shelter their new horse and eventual livestock. Clara discovered garden tools in the lean-to, their metal pitted but serviceable. Behind the cabin, raised beds marked an old kitchen garden, now wild with volunteer herbs, sage, thyme, mint that had refused to die. As darkness approached, Eli built their first fire in the hearth. The chimney drew properly after he cleared a bird's nest from the flue. Clara prepared their meal on the old stove, its iron surface responding to heat like it had been waiting. She used water from their new well, vegetables from the mercantile, and wild herbs from the abandoned garden. The simple stew tasted like a feast in their own walls. They sat on crates before the fire, their shadows dancing on walls that would soon know their daily patterns. The silence stretched, comfortable but expectant. Finally, Clara spoke. "We should be clear about our arrangement." Eli nodded, setting down his coffee cup. "Speak plain. What are your terms?" "We're partners, equal in all things. Decisions made together. Work shared according to ability, not tradition." Clara met his eyes steadily. "I won't be a servant in my own home. Eli, I've been that. Never again." "Agreed. What else?" "Separate sleeping quarters unless we decide otherwise. My reputation may be compromised by town standards, but between us, there'll be respect, patience." "You'll have both," Eli promised. "Always." Clara continued, her voice gaining strength. "I keep learning. Not just women's work, but all of it, building, planting, whatever's needed. And you let me teach you what I know without pride getting in the way." "Fair enough." Eli leaned back, studying her in the firelight. "My terms are simple. We're honest with each other, even when it's hard. No running without discussion, either of us. And we build something that lasts, not just for us, but for what comes after. Children." The word hung between them, weighted with possibility and past grief. "Maybe, if you want, when you're ready." Eli's voice was careful. "But even without them, we build something worth lasting. A place where people find welcome, where the broken can heal." Clara stood, moving to her trunk. From it, she pulled her mother's small mirror, its silver backing tarnished, but glass still clear. "Where should we hang this?" Eli considered, then pointed to the space beside the door. "There. So we see ourselves clearly before we face the world." As he hammered in the nail, Clara watched their reflections, two people worn by loss, but not defeated by it. When the mirror was secure, she nodded. Now it's home. That first night, Clara slept in the small bedroom on a pallet of blankets while Eli took the loft. She could hear him moving above, the unfamiliar creaks of a new place making them both restless. But underneath the strangeness lay something profound, the peace of being where they'd chosen, with whom they'd chosen. 6 months later, spring had transformed their valley. Clara stood in her garden, hands deep in soil she'd enriched through winter with compost and care. The seeds from the Burpee catalog had arrived in February, and now green shoots pushed through the warming earth. Tomatoes, beans, the corn from the abandoned packet she'd found that first day. The cabin had been transformed too. Eli had replaced the roof with help from neighboring homesteaders. The barn door swings of communal labor where everyone helped knowing their turn would come. New chinking sealed the walls. Glass windows from Denver, their first major purchase, let in clean light. The porch, rebuilt with lumber bought on credit, now supported the weight of 2 rocking chairs traded for Clara's mending work. She heard Eli's hammer from the barn where he was building stalls for the milk cow they'd bought and the calf she'd dropped last month. The rhythmic sound had become the heartbeat of their days. Along with her spinning wheel, a wedding gift from Mrs. Bowen Henderson, given with a knowing smile, though no wedding had occurred. Not yet. Clara, Eli called. Ryder's coming. She shaded her eyes, recognizing the Paulson family from the neighboring claim. Sunday visits had become tradition among the scattered homesteaders, each family taking turns hosting simple meals and precious conversation. Mrs. Paulson had become especially dear to Clara, a woman who'd made her own hard choices and understood that respectability and happiness weren't always companions. The Paulsons brought news from town, a jar of preserves, and their 3 children who immediately ran to see the new calf. As the women prepared dinner, Mrs. Paulson mentioned Clara's aunt. "She's telling everyone you're living in sin," she said bluntly. "Says she tried to save you, but you chose ruin." Clara laughed, surprising herself with the genuineness of it. "I chose life. Let her talk." "Folks are starting to see different," Mrs. Paulson continued. "The way Eli looks at you, the way you two work together. Some are saying it's the most honest partnership they've seen, paper or no paper." That evening, after the Paulsons left, Clara and Eli sat on their new porch watching the sun set over their fields. The apple trees were in bloom, white petals drifting like snow. The wild roses had been pruned and tended, now climbing a trellis Eli had built, their garden spread before them, neat rows promising abundance. "Henderson asked when we're making it official," Eli said casually. "Says the circuit preacher comes through next month." Clara considered. Over the winter, they'd grown closer, the careful boundaries they'd maintained gradually softening. She'd moved from the bedroom to share the loft, though they still kept separate bedrolls. They'd kissed once, at Christmas. Beneath mistletoe she'd hung hopefully. It had been tender, patient, a promise of more when ready. "June," she said, "when the roses are in full bloom, if you're willing to wait." "I'd wait forever," Eli replied. "But June sounds perfect." The morning of the summer solstice, the longest day of the year, Clara woke before dawn. Through the window Eli had installed with such care, she could see the first pink streaks of sunrise. She dressed quietly, not wanting to wake him, and made her way to the kitchen. The iron stove from the Montgomery Ward catalog had arrived last month, Eli surprising her with the order he'd placed secretly. She built the fire with practiced ease, set coffee to brew proper coffee now, not trail brew. Through the window, she watched their land-waked chickens stirring in their coop, the cow lowing for morning milking, garden plants reaching toward the rising sun. Eli appeared, suspenders hanging loose, hair still mussed from sleep. 6 months of regular meals and settled life had filled him out, though his eyes still carried watchful care. He poured himself coffee, then joined her at the window. "Year ago, you were probably counting days to California with your brother," he said quietly. "Year ago, you were drifting toward nowhere particular," she replied. "Look at us now." They stood together, shoulders touching, watching their domain come alive. The Hendricks family's intentions had finally borne fruit, just not in the way they'd planned. The land that had broken one dream had become foundation for another. "I hung wash yesterday," Clara said, "and found myself humming, not from habit or nervousness, but from joy. Simple, ordinary joy at hanging clothes on my own line, at my own home, with my chosen partner nearby." "Sarah used to say happiness lived in small moments," Eli said, her name coming easier now. "I didn't understand then. I do now." Clara turned to face him fully. "We did it, didn't we? Built something real from loss and chance?" "Still building," Eli corrected. "Every day, choosing to stay, choosing each other. That's the real homestead, not the land, but the choosing." The sun cleared the horizon, flooding their kitchen with golden light. In 2 weeks, the circuit preacher would speak words over them that the town would recognize. But here, now, in the dawn of summer's longest day, they were already married in every way that mattered. Clara lifted her coffee cup in a toast. "To the drifter who stopped drifting," Eli raised his own. "To the woman who chose her own path." They drank, the bitter coffee sweet with shared understanding. Through the window, Their garden grew toward harvest. Their animals called for tending. Their life together waited for another day's work and care. "You know what I think," Clara said, setting down her cup and moving into the circle of Eli's arms, a gesture that had become natural as breathing. "We found ourselves by finding each other." "Best finding of my life," Eli murmured against her hair. The sun climbed higher. Neighbors would visit later. Work waited in field and garden. But for now, they stood in their kitchen, in their home, in their chosen life, holding each other as the day bloomed full of promise. Two souls who'd started as strangers on a dusty trail had become partners in the deepest sense, not just in land or labor, but in the daily choosing that builds a life worth living. Outside, the wild roses bloomed in profusion, their scent drifting through windows opened wide to summer. They'd been waiting all along, these roses, for someone to tend them, just as Clara and Eli had been waiting, unknowing, for each other. The homestead held them all now: roses, gardens. Two people who'd transformed abandonment into belonging, who'd learned that home isn't a place you find, but something you choose to build, day by day, with whoever is brave enough to build alongside you. Sometimes the greatest gifts come disguised as abandonment. Clara stood alone in that prairie dust, cast off by blood family who saw her as burden, and in that moment of deepest rejection, grace appeared in the form of a weathered drifter who knew the weight of carrying ghosts. What they built together teaches us something essential about gratitude and family. True family isn't always born of blood. It's forged in the choice to stay, when leaving would be easier, in seeing someone's worth when the world calls them worthless. Eli saw Clara not as damaged goods, but as capable partner. Clara saw Eli not as aimless wanderer, but as man worthy of trust and tenderness. Their story reminds me that we must be grateful not just for the comfortable blessings, but for the hard gifts too, the losses that teach us to value what remains, the rejections that free us to find where we truly belong. Every time Clara worked that garden or Eli repaired that roof, they were saying thank you to chances taken, to each other for staying, family. I've learned from them. Is anyone brave enough to build beside you when the world says you're too broken to bother with?